2,500 years ago, a man rose from the mountains of Persia and built an empire larger than the world had ever seen. He conquered kings, freed nations, and wrote the first laws of human rights, before vanishing into legend. His name was Cyrus the Great. In the barren, windswept plains of ancient Persia, under a sky that burned gold at dawn and bled red at sunset, a child was born who would rise to become one of the greatest rulers in human history. His name was Cyrus. To his people, he would be remembered as the father, to his enemies as the conqueror, and to the centuries that followed as Cyrus the Great, the man who built the world's first true superpower, and did so not through tyranny alone, but through a kind of power the ancient world could barely understand: mercy. It began around the year 600 before Christ in the small kingdom of Anshan, a vassal state under the rule of the Median Empire. The boy was born into the royal Achaemenid family, but there was little comfort in this bloodline. Persia at the time was a land hemmed in on all sides. To the north, the Medes, fierce and proud. To the west, the powerful Babylonians. To the east, tribes of warriors hardened by the deserts and mountains, and beyond them, the restless nomads of the steppes. The young Cyrus grew up in a world where survival meant strength, and leadership meant knowing when to fight and when to unite. The first test of his destiny came when he turned against his Median overlords. It was not an easy rebellion. The Medes had ruled for generations, and their armies were disciplined and experienced. But Cyrus was more than a soldier. He was a strategist. He understood the terrain, the supply lines, and the hearts of the people. His campaigns were swift and decisive, using speed and maneuver rather than blunt force. When he finally defeated the Median king, Astyages, the world expected a bloodbath. Instead, Cyrus did something almost unthinkable. He spared his defeated foe, kept many of his officials in place, and absorbed the Median army into his own. He transformed enemies into allies. It was the beginning of his reputation as a ruler who conquered without destroying, who built where others tore down. With the Medes now part of his strength, Cyrus turned his gaze west. Across the mountains lay Lydia, ruled by the legendary King Croesus, a man so rich that his name became a proverb. Croesus commanded a powerful army and the fortified city of Sardis. Yet Cyrus moved with relentless purpose, defeating Croesus in battle and capturing Sardis. Once again, he spared the defeated king, earning respect even from those he conquered. The cities of Ionia and the Greek settlements along the coast soon fell under his sway, drawn not just by his power, but by the stability and prosperity that followed in his wake. But the jewel of the ancient Near East was still to come: Babylon. A city of wonders, its walls so massive that ancient writers claimed chariots could race along the top. Babylon had stood for centuries, a center of wealth, learning, and religion. Yet by 539 BC, it was ripe for the taking. The Babylonian king, Nabonidus, was unpopular, his neglect of the city's chief god, Marduk, alienating the powerful priesthood. Cyrus saw his chance. Moving his armies with precision, he diverted the Euphrates River, lowering the water level enough for his soldiers to slip into the city under the cover of night. Babylon fell without a siege, without the slaughter that so often accompanied victory in those days. When Cyrus entered the city, it was not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. What followed was extraordinary. Cyrus issued a declaration inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform on what is now known as the Cyrus Cylinder. In it, he proclaimed freedom of worship for all peoples under his rule. He ordered the restoration of temples, the return of sacred statues taken by previous kings, and the repatriation of displaced communities. Among those freed were the Jews exiled in Babylon, who were allowed to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. This was not mere generosity. It was calculated statecraft. By respecting the gods of his subjects, Cyrus ensured their loyalty. By granting freedom instead of imposing tyranny, he bound the hearts of many to his cause. The empire that emerged from Cyrus's campaigns stretched farther than any before it, from the Aegean Sea in the west to the mountains of Central Asia in the east, from the steppes of the north to the Persian Gulf in the south. It encompassed dozens of cultures, languages, and faiths. Ruling such a vast domain was no simple feat, yet Cyrus devised a system that endured long after his death. He divided the empire into satrapies, each governed by a satrap, a local ruler who oversaw administration, collected taxes, and maintained order while still answering to the king. The satraps were given autonomy, but also watched carefully by royal inspectors, the king's eyes and ears, who travelled the empire to report directly to Cyrus. Trade flourished under his reign. New roads connected distant provinces, and a standardized currency made commerce easier. Caravans moved safely across lands that had once been plagued by bandits and warring tribes. Farmers could harvest without fear of raids, and merchants could travel knowing that the law of the king would protect them, whether they were in Persia, Lydia, or Babylon. Yet Cyrus was no distant figure locked away in a palace. He rode with his armies, spoke with his soldiers, and listened to the concerns of his people. He was a king who understood that power was not merely held, it was maintained by constant presence and vigilance. The respect he commanded was not only from fear of his armies, but from the sense that he saw himself as the protector of all under his rule. In 530 BC, Cyrus led a campaign against the Massagetae, a fierce nomadic people who roamed the steppes beyond the empire's northeastern frontier. These were warriors who lived by the bow and the spear, their lives bound to the horse and the hunt. The fighting was brutal. In one of these battles, Cyrus fell. Ancient accounts differ on the manner of his death, but all agree that the loss was profound. The man who had built an empire larger than any before, it was gone. Cyrus was laid to rest in a tomb at Pasargadae, the city he had founded as his capital. The tomb is simple, a rectangular stone chamber atop 6 broad steps, standing alone against the Persian sky. There is no boastful inscription, only the quiet dignity of a ruler who did not need to carve his greatness into stone because it was already etched into history. His legacy was immense. The Greeks, including Xenophon, wrote admiringly of him. Alexander the Great, centuries later, would visit his tomb and order it restored when he found it damaged. The principles he set down, tolerance, respect for different cultures, and governance that blended strength with mercy, have echoed across the centuries. In modern times, the Cyrus Cylinder has been hailed as the world's first charter of human rights. Cyrus the Great was more than a conqueror. He was a builder, a unifier, a visionary who understood that the greatest empires are not held together by chains, but by the shared belief that their ruler's hand is J. He proved that a king could command armies and still honor the gods of his enemies, that he could rule the known world and still grant freedom to its peoples. Across deserts and mountains, through cities and ruins, his name still carries weight. He conquered not only the lands between the seas, but the hearts of those who lived in them. And though the centuries have buried countless kings and empires in the sands of time, the voice of Cyrus still seems to echo in the wind. I am Cyrus, king of the world, and this is the empire I built.